during the middle of Derek is cracking up, so I need to know what Derek is laughing at. Derek, what do we got?
I'm watching the replay.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, boys and girls, this coming Sunday, you will not have to watch Chad do a cartwheel, but you will get to watch Chad teach a Bible lesson.
Amen.
And I'm telling you, he's teaching the Bible lesson. He's much better at that than the cartwheel that he just pulled off, all right? And then we also have a kid's song for you, all right? It's the CARES song. So we want to make sure that that you're learning that song for this weekend. I think we have that. So we're going to let you hear this song one more time. And boys and girls, I want you to learn the song. Sing it over and over so that way you can learn it. All right, Derek, let's play the song.
Hey there, boys and girls. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to teach you a chorus that I learned when I was a boy, and I've taught it to my kids, and we wanted to teach it to you. It's called the CARES Chorus. We hope it'll be a blessing to you like it's been to us. I cast all my cares upon you. I lay all of my burdens down at your feet. And anytime I don't know what to do, I will cast all my cares upon you. Let's do it one more time. I cast all my cares upon you. I lay all of my burdens down at your feet. And anytime I don't know what to do, I will cast all of my cares upon you. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you.
All right, church family. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us tonight. I want to give you a devotional thought before we go. So if you have your Bibles, I want to encourage you to go with me to the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, and we're going to end up at the very final chapter of Genesis, which is chapter 50. But before we get there, I want to show you a correlation between the devotion that we saw last night and what we're thinking about this evening. And you'll remember last night, it was Elisha and his servant, and they were in the city there in Dothan, and they were surrounded by the Assyrian army, and they were outnumbered 15-1. And what Elisha says is, you have to get your faith out, and you have to choose to make your faith active in your life. And you have to choose to see God at work in spite of the circumstance that you're facing. And we said that you can either focus on the trial or you can focus on God. You can either focus on the problem or you can focus on the Lord. And Elisha encourages his servant, we have to see what God is doing. And because he exercises his faith, because of that, the servant then, his eyes are open and he realizes, man, there's soldiers and angels of armies full of angels and chariots of fire and all of that surrounding those that were surrounding them. And so this is that lesson there was sometimes in our lives it requires foresight to give us insight. That we need to actively look for what God is doing in our life in order to know what God is doing. But there's another lesson, and the other lesson correlates with that, and it's this lesson. It is sometimes hindsight provides insight. So sometimes in our life, what's necessary for us to see what God is doing in us and with us and through us is to look back on what has been done. And in looking back on what has been done, then the Lord provides to us in that moment an understanding of all that he's been doing in our life to bring us to a particular place. Okay, so you're going to see a correlation because in Genesis chapter 37, this is Joseph going after his brothers. And you'll notice And the man said, they departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Okay, so the same city that Elisha and his servant were in. And it's an equivalence. It's the same city because it's teaching us, there's an equivalency lesson about what's happening. Now, Joseph obviously gets sold into slavery. He ends up in Potiphar's house. He ends up falsely accused. And he ends up telling the dreams. Then he ends up as the head honcho in all of Egypt, next to Pharaoh, essentially. And then his brothers, because of the famine, are forced to come to Egypt to find him. There's this long event that happens. And I encourage you to really spend time reading Genesis 48, Genesis 49, Genesis chapter 50. And you'll see, man, even during this famine, God is actually using it to provide safety and security for his people. And then Joseph says at the end of this entire event, his brothers basically fall flat on their faces in front of him. They're weeping. They're begging for mercy. And Joseph in this says, if you look at verse 19, Genesis 50, 19, Joseph says, fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, and to save much people alive. So there's a couple of things that happen in this text where Joseph is actually using hindsight that gives him insight into what God is doing. Okay, and there's a couple of things. Here's the first one. The first one is he is actually honest about the situation that he's gone through. Yeah. He does not say, well, there's no evil. He does not say there was no problem. He views the situation as the situation really is. And how was the situation? The situation was evil. Yeah. The situation was terrible. Yeah. It was awful. His brothers sold him into slavery. His brothers lied to his own father. His brothers concocted this whole story of his death. From there, Joseph ends up falsely accused, and then he ends up in prison. There is nothing about that entire scenario that is good. And so what Joseph has a proper and honest view of the situation that he's just gone through. What is basically the equivalent of decades of his life. Yep. So we're talking about what's been happening in our lives for 4 weeks. Joseph is talking about what's been happening in his life for decades. And what he says is, all of this is actually evil, and it was actually applied in my heart for evil. He is honest about the scenario that he's gone through. He isn't trying to hurt. He isn't trying to cover the hurt. He isn't trying to mask it. He isn't trying to paint it over and, well, it wasn't as bad as... No. There was nothing about this good. And I think sometimes in our own lives where we have this emotional disconnect from what we're feeling, and we're afraid to be honest about how we feel about particular situations and circumstances, because we feel like, well, if I'm spiritual, then I won't say it hurt. And if I'm spiritual, then I won't say it was scary. And if I'm spiritual, and what I'm telling you is that is never the message of the Bible. That is never the message of the Bible. God says, no, things in your life are scary. But what time you are afraid, trust in me. Yeah. And there are things in your life that are hurtful. But what should you do with those hurts? You should take those hurts to the Lord. You shouldn't bury them. You should ask the Lord to heal them. Yeah. What should you do with the pain? You shouldn't pretend like there is no pain and just tough it up. No, you're supposed to take that pain to the Lord and allow him to heal all of the pain. You're supposed to bring it to him and allow him to ease it. And there's this necessary position of honesty that we have to have about difficulty in our life. There's nothing good about losing your job. There's nothing enjoyable about the possibility of divorce. It's not just normal to go through some kind of loss. But these things, they cause us to see our frailty. They cause us to recognize that we are weak. They cause us to recognize the deficiencies that we have in this life, of which every one of us have. And because a lot of times we can't ever get to the place where we can find full healing and help because we won't be honest about what we're currently experiencing or going through. So the first thing I notice in this thing is Joseph is completely honest about the situation. The situation's evil. It's not good. But the second thing I've noticed is Joseph has not just a good view of the situation, Joseph actually has the proper view of God. So Joseph says in verse 19, "Fear not, for am I in the place of God?" Okay, so actually what Joseph does there is actually, he gives that kind of very famous answer. What you meant for evil, God intended for good. And that's the part that we all remember. But how Joseph got to that place of assurance is Joseph refused to sit in the place of God. You see, and sometimes the reason we can't heal, the reason we can't recover, the reason we can't move forward, the reason we can't get beyond bitterness, and the reason we can't get past tragedy, of which we've all had, sometimes the reason that is because we choose to sit in God's place. And so Joseph says, am I in the place of God? So Joseph has this sense of humility about himself. And so these are two things that Joseph have that a lot of times I'm lacking. Joseph has an honesty about what he really went through. It hurt. It was evil. Yeah. But Joseph also has a humility in saying, it was evil, but I am not your judge. I am not the final say. I'm not going to sit in the place of God and take up into my hands revenge, because that belongs to the Lord. So Joseph operates in this position of humility. Joseph operates in the position of honesty. And because of his honesty and his humility, notice what he can say. Because Joseph is an honest man and because Joseph is a humble man, what can he say? What you meant for evil, God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, and to save much people alive. So Joseph ends up with this amazing sense of assurance. And in essence, what he says at the end of this text is, you couldn't stop God from doing what God was going to do. You cannot prevent God from doing what he is going to do in the world. And this is what we've been saying over and over the last ever. God is up to something. God is up to something. God is up to something. But the way that you get to that sense of assurance, the way you come to know that kind of confidence in your life is through humility and through honesty. And without humility and honesty, then you never actually have that full sense of assurance that God is doing this good in my life, and it's resulting in not only myself being saved, but all the people of the world being saved, even his brothers living in famine, even as a result of your evil actions and intentions. It's actually brought good. It's actually accomplished good in the world. And so this is my question for you. In what part of your life do you need honesty and humility? In what part of your life do you need, that was a painful experience. That was a difficult journey. Those were tough days. That was a bad decade. In what part of your life do you need that kind of honesty? And then in what part of your life do you need a sense of humility that says, I'm refusing to sit in the place of God. And I'm going to allow God to have his perfect will and his perfect way in my life. And my friend, when you can get to that place of humility and honesty, the sooner you can get to that place of humility and honesty, the sooner you can find the kind of assurance that Joseph had. And far too often, we just try to jump right into Genesis 50:20 without ever walking into humility and honesty first. Sometimes in your life, the way to get the insight that you need is to have the hindsight of saying, I don't know best. I don't know all. I can't see around the next corner. I don't know what 5, 10, 20 years looks like. But I want to have a sense of humility in my life, and I want to have a sense of honesty in my life so that I can live with an assurance. Are you living with an assurance? You can live with that Joseph kind of confidence if you will walk with humility and if you'll walk with honesty. Amen. I want to thank you so much, church, for tuning in with us today. I hope it was at least enjoyable for a little while. We had some good laughs. And I want to encourage you to do two things. Number one, make a reminder to be with us tomorrow, Wednesday at 7 o'clock for our midweek service. We're going to be studying Psalms chapter 103. And then also, let me encourage you, if you haven't done so lately, head over to the church website and click on the tab that says Prayer Wall. And go ahead and make mention in prayer of the needs that were put there. And then if you have a prayer request, you can post your prayer request there as well. And you'll know that we're praying for you in that way. God bless you, church family. Please stay safe. If there is a need that you have in your life, please contact your deacon, your care group leader, or one of us as staff members, and we'll do all that we can to help you. God bless. Stay safe.